The slap echoed through Westfield High's main hallway like a gunshot. 37 students watched. 12 phones recorded. But what happened next turned a moment of humiliation into the scandal that destroyed the most powerful family in town. Because they didn't know, Harper Mackenzie had been documenting their crimes for 6 months. And today, she finally had enough evidence. The morning of October 15th started like any other Tuesday at Westfield High, the kind of crisp autumn day where football practice fog still clung to the perfectly manicured fields, and the scent of pumpkin spice lattes from the student cafe mixed with the familiar smell of floor wax and teenage anxiety. Harper Mackenzie arrived at 7:15 a.m., exactly 45 minutes before first bell, her camera bag slung over one shoulder, her worn leather messenger bag over the other, moving through the empty hallways with the practiced silence of someone who had perfected the art of being invisible. At 17, Harper possessed the kind of sharp intelligence that made adults uncomfortable and peers resentful. Her essays dissected social inequalities with surgical precision. Her photographs captured moments others preferred to ignore, and her questions in journalism class had a way of cutting straight through carefully constructed lies. She was editor of the Westfield Herald, the school newspaper that most students used as scratch paper. But Harper had bigger plans for those pages than lunch menus and football scores. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes were neat, but clearly not designer, and her green eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses missed absolutely nothing. She came from the kind of family where every dollar was stretched and every opportunity was earned. Her mother, Linda, worked double shifts at the county hospital while studying for her nursing degree, and Harper's full scholarship to Westfield was the golden ticket that would lift them both out of their cramped apartment on the wrong side of town. What none of her classmates knew was that Harper Mackenzie was not just documenting high school life for the newspaper. She was building a case that would expose the rot at the heart of Westfield's perfect facade. For 6 months, she had been photographing incidents, recording conversations, and connecting dots that painted a picture of systematic abuse protected by wealth and silence. Her journalism teacher, Mrs. Clark, had taught her that the best stories were the ones people didn't want told, and Harper had found the story of a lifetime right under everyone's noses. The undisputed king of Westfield High was Braden Ashworth, 18 years old, 6'2" of quarterback muscle and inherited arrogance, with perfectly styled blonde hair and blue eyes that sparkled with the kind of cruelty that money had always protected. He was student body president, football captain, and heir to the Ashworth Industries fortune, a multi-million-dollar construction empire that had built half the buildings in the county, including the new Westfield Library and the state-of-the-art science wing where Harper spent most of her free time developing photographs in the darkroom. Braden walked through Westfield's halls like he owned them, because, in many ways, he did. His father, Robert Ashworth, was chairman of the school board. His mother sat on the Parent-Teacher Association Executive Committee, and the family's annual donations to the school exceeded the salaries of half the teaching staff. When Braden smiled, teachers smiled back. When he laughed, everyone laughed with him. And when he decided someone needed to be put in their place, the administration somehow always looked the other way. But Harper had been watching, and she had seen the cracks in Braden's golden armor. She had photographed him shoving freshman Marcus Peterson into lockers, recorded audio of him threatening sophomore girl Madison Brooks with social destruction if she didn't help him cheat on chemistry tests, documented dozens of incidents where Braden's crew had systematically terrorized anyone who dared to challenge their authority. More importantly, she had discovered that these weren't isolated incidents of teenage cruelty. They were part of a pattern that went all the way to the top. Principal Victoria Sterling was a 45-year-old career climber who had turned willful blindness into an art form. Her office walls were covered with awards for academic excellence and community leadership. But Harper's investigation had revealed that those achievements came at a price. Every time a victim's family complained about Braden's behavior. Mysterious donations appeared in the school's accounts. Every time someone threatened to go to the police, they suddenly found themselves facing academic or financial pressures that made silence seem like the wiser choice. Harper's best friend, Kenzie Walsh, was one of the few people who knew about the investigation. A 17-year-old theater kid with bright purple streaks in her brown hair and a fierce loyalty that had kept Harper sane through the darkest moments of her research. Kenzie was the one who had suggested Harper start carrying a hidden recording device, a tiny digital recorder that looked like a pen and could capture conversations from across a crowded room. "You're going to change everything," Kenzie had told her just last week, as they sat in the empty theater after rehearsal for the fall play. "But are you ready for everything to change you?" It was a question that kept Harper awake at night, because she knew that once she published her story, there would be no going back. Braden's family had the power to destroy her mother's career, revoke her scholarship, and make sure she never got into another decent school. But they also had the power to keep destroying innocent kids. And Harper couldn't live with that silence anymore. The first real test had come 3 weeks ago. Harper was photographing the homecoming dance preparations when she witnessed Braden corner Skylar Pierce, the head cheerleader who was also his girlfriend. Skylar was everything Harper wasn't. Blonde, beautiful, from old money, and trapped in a relationship that looked perfect from the outside. But Harper could see the fear in Skylar's eyes when Braden gripped her wrist just a little too tightly while talking about her college plans. "You'll go to State, not Stanford," Braden had said, his voice quiet but firm. "We've already decided this. My father has connections there, and I need you close by." Harper had been hidden behind a backdrop, her camera ready, but what she captured was more than just another incident of control. She captured the moment when Skylar's dreams died in her eyes, the moment when she realized that her entire future had been planned by someone else. That photograph had become the centerpiece of Harper's growing file, because it showed that Braden's abuse wasn't limited to random targets. He controlled everyone around him: his girlfriend, his teammates, his followers, even the adults who were supposed to protect students from people like him. But the most shocking discovery had come when Harper had hacked into the school's disciplinary records, a skill she had learned from watching YouTube tutorials in the computer lab after hours. What she found was a pattern that made her stomach turn. Over the past 3 years, 17 students had been quietly transferred out of Westfield after reporting incidents involving Braden or his inner circle. Their records showed various reasons: family relocations, academic difficulties, behavioral problems, but Harper had tracked down 3 of those families and discovered the truth. They had been given a choice: leave quietly or face consequences that would destroy their children's futures. The Ashworth family didn't just buy silence, they manufactured it, polished it, and displayed it like another trophy in their collection. But Harper had learned something important from her journalism training. Every system of corruption had a weakness, and that weakness was usually pride. Braden had gotten away with everything for so long that he had become careless, and careless people made mistakes. The mistake came on a gray Monday morning in late October. Harper was in the library's computer lab, working on an article about college preparation resources, when she overheard Braden talking to his best friend Ethan Cross near the reference desk. Ethan was a wrestler with a conscience that he kept carefully hidden. Harper had always suspected he was uncomfortable with Braden's behavior, but loyalty had kept him silent. "The newspaper girl is becoming a problem," Braden said, not bothering to lower his voice because he assumed everyone would pretend not to hear. "She's been asking questions about the Henderson incident, and her little photos are starting to annoy me." Harper's blood ran cold. The Henderson incident was something she had discovered by accident while researching a completely different story. 3 months ago, a sophomore named Tyler Henderson had accused Braden of assaulting him after a football game, but Tyler's family had suddenly moved to Oregon the following week, and all records of the incident had mysteriously disappeared from the school's files. "Maybe you should just leave her alone," Ethan suggested, his voice uncertain. "She's just doing newspaper stuff. It's probably nothing serious." Braden's laugh was like ice, cold and sharp, and completely without humor. "Nothing serious. She's been photographing us, recording conversations, digging through records she has no business accessing. Do you think I'm stupid?" "Ethan, do you think I don't know what she's building toward?" Harper felt her hands shake as she pretended to focus on her laptop screen, but every word was being captured by the recording device hidden in her pencil case. This was it. This was Braden admitting that he knew about her investigation and saw it as a threat worth stopping. "What are you going to do?" Ethan asked, and Harper could hear the worry in his voice. "What I always do," Braden replied. "I'm going to remind Harper Mackenzie that some stories are too dangerous to tell, and some people are too small to matter." That conversation had happened exactly 1 week ago, and Harper had spent every day since then waiting for Braden to make his move. She had backed up all her files to multiple cloud accounts, given copies of her evidence to Kenzie with instructions to contact the authorities if anything happened to her, and prepared herself for whatever form Braden's retaliation would take. What she hadn't expected was how it would begin, with something so seemingly innocent that she almost missed it. On Friday afternoon, Harper's mother received a call from the hospital administrator. There had been questions raised about her work performance, concerns about attention to detail, suggestions that perhaps she was taking on too much with her studies and her job. Nothing actionable, nothing specific, just enough pressure to let Linda Mackenzie know that her daughter's activities were being noticed by people with power. "They know," Harper had told Kenzie that evening, as they sat in Harper's tiny bedroom surrounded by photographs and documents that told the story of Westfield's darkest secrets. "They know what I'm doing, and they're starting to push back." "So what do we do?" Kenzie asked, her purple-streaked hair falling across her face as she leaned over a particularly damning photograph of Braden intimidating a younger student. "We finish it," Harper said simply, "before they can stop us." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Harper would publish her exposé in Monday's edition of the Westfield Herald, but not before she had one final piece of evidence that would make denial impossible. She needed Braden to incriminate himself so completely that even his family's money couldn't buy him out of the consequences, and she suspected that his pride would make that easier than anyone expected. Monday morning brought unseasonably warm weather and the kind of energy that crackled through high school hallways when something big was about to happen. Harper arrived early as always, but this time she wasn't alone. Kenzie had convinced several other students to position themselves strategically throughout the main hallway with their phones ready, ostensibly to film promotional content for the fall play, but actually to capture whatever confrontation Harper's article was about to provoke. The first edition of the Westfield Herald hit the stands at 7:45 a.m. Harper had titled her front-page article, "Campus Safety Concerns, a Pattern of Behavior." And while she had been careful not to name specific students, anyone who read it would understand exactly who she was writing about. She had documented incidents of harassment, intimidation, and assault, identified patterns of administrative cover-ups, and raised questions about the influence of wealthy families on school disciplinary decisions. By 8:30 a.m., the article had been shared on social media dozens of times. By 9 a.m., it was the subject of heated discussion in every classroom. And by 9:15 a.m., Braden Ashworth was stalking through the hallways with the fury of someone whose carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. Harper was at her locker, organizing her books for second period. When she felt the familiar chill that meant Braden was approaching, she had developed a sixth sense for his presence over the months of observation, and she could feel his anger radiating across the crowded hallway like heat from a fire. She kept her movements calm and deliberate, checking her hidden recording device, adjusting the small camera she wore like a button on her jacket, and reminding herself that everything she had worked for depended on the next few minutes. Harper. Braden's voice was deceptively friendly, the tone he used when he wanted witnesses to think he was being reasonable. I read your little article this morning. Very creative writing. I especially enjoyed the part where you used words like alleged and according to sources to avoid actually saying anything substantial. Harper turned to face him, her expression calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. I'm glad you found it educational, Braden. Journalism is all about presenting facts and letting readers draw their own conclusions. Facts, Braden repeated, stepping closer until he was invading her personal space in a way that made nearby students stop and stare. Is it a fact that you've been stalking me and my friends for months? Is it a fact that you've been taking unauthorized photographs and recordings? Is it a fact that you've been accessing confidential school records without permission? Harper felt a thrill of satisfaction. He was admitting to everything, and her recording device was capturing every word. Those are certainly interesting questions. Braden, perhaps you should discuss them with Principal Sterling. Oh, I already have. Braden's smile was sharp and predatory. And she's very concerned about your behavior, apparently. There are serious questions about your journalistic ethics and your respect for other students' privacy. In fact, she's wondering if someone with such poor judgment deserves to represent Westfield High as editor of the school newspaper. The threat was clear. Harper's position, her scholarship, her entire future was being held hostage to buy her silence. Around them, the hallway had grown quieter as students sensed the confrontation escalating. Some were openly filming now, their phones held high to capture whatever was about to happen. I see, Harper said carefully. And what would it take to resolve these concerns about my judgment? Braden's grin widened. He thought he had won, thought she was ready to negotiate her surrender. A public apology would be a good start, an acknowledgement that your article was based on rumors and speculation rather than facts. Maybe a follow-up piece about the positive leadership examples set by student government and athletics programs. Harper looked around the hallway at the dozens of faces watching their exchange, some curious, some fearful, some clearly hoping to see her humiliated. She thought about Tyler Henderson, forced to move across the country to escape Braden's cruelty, about Madison Brooks, terrorized into silence, about Skylar Pierce, her dreams sacrificed to Braden's control, about all the victims whose stories had been buried under donations and threats. No, she said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Braden's confident expression flickered with confusion and then anger. Excuse me. I said no, Harper repeated, her voice growing stronger. I won't apologize for telling the truth. I won't retract factual reporting, and I won't be intimidated into silence by someone who thinks his family's money makes him untouchable. The hallway was completely silent now. Even the freshmen had stopped their chattering to watch the confrontation unfold. Braden's face was flushing red, his hands clenching into fists at his sides as his carefully maintained mask of controlled authority began to slip. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "My family built this school. We own this town. We decide what stories get told and which ones get buried. You're nothing. Harper, your family is nothing. Your little scholarship is nothing compared to what we can take away from you." Harper felt the familiar calm settle over her, the same centered feeling she experienced when she was photographing a particularly important moment. When everything slowed down and her senses sharpened, and she knew she was about to capture something that would change everything. "Thank you," she said quietly. Braden blinked in confusion. "What?" "I said thank you," Harper repeated, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hallway. "That was exactly what I needed." And that's when Braden Ashworth made the biggest mistake of his life. His hand came up fast and hard, connecting with Harper's left cheek with a crack that echoed off the lockers like a gunshot, sending her glasses askew and leaving a bright red handprint on her pale skin. For a moment, everything was perfectly still. 37 students stood frozen. 12 phones continued recording, and Harper Mackenzie slowly reached up to adjust her glasses, her cheek burning from the impact, but her green eyes blazing with something that looked very much like victory. "Thank you," she said again, her voice steady despite the pain. "That's exactly what I needed." Because what Braden didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Harper Mackenzie had been wearing a hidden camera all morning, and every second of his attack had been captured in perfect high-definition video with crystal-clear audio. More importantly, her phone had been set to live stream directly to the Westfield Herald's social media accounts, and by the time Braden's hand had finished stinging from the impact, his assault on a fellow student was already being viewed by hundreds of people beyond the walls of Westfield High. The slap that was meant to silence Harper Mackenzie had instead become the evidence that would bring down everything Braden thought his family's power could protect. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then chaos erupted as students began shouting. Phones buzzed with incoming notifications, and the live stream counter on Harper's phone climbed past 500 viewers and kept rising. But Harper Mackenzie stood perfectly still in the center of it all, her hand still pressed to her burning cheek, her green eyes locked on Braden's face as she watched the exact moment he realized what he had done. "You're live streaming," Braden whispered, his blue eyes widening as he noticed the red recording light on Harper's phone. "You've been live streaming this entire conversation." "Every word," Harper confirmed, her voice carrying clearly over the growing noise around them. "Including your threats about your family owning this school and deciding which stories get told, including your admission that you know about my investigation, and most importantly, including your assault on a fellow student that was just witnessed by 37 people and recorded by 12 different devices." Braden's face went from flushed red to pale white in the span of a heartbeat. Around them, students were frantically refreshing their social media feeds as the video spread beyond Westfield's walls and into the wider world. The hashtag #WestfieldTruth was already trending locally, and Harper could see notification after notification popping up on her phone as news outlets, advocacy groups, and concerned parents began sharing the footage. "This isn't over," Braden snarled, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. For the first time in his life, Braden Ashworth was facing consequences he couldn't buy his way out of, and the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "Yes, it is," Harper replied simply, "because in about 30 minutes, when the school board receives the evidence file I've compiled over the past 6 months, they're going to learn that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of abuse that goes all the way to the top of this institution." The crowd around them had grown larger. Word was spreading through the building like wildfire, and students were abandoning their classes to witness what everyone could sense was a historic moment. Among the faces, Harper spotted several teachers looking confused and concerned. They had heard the commotion, but didn't yet understand that everything they thought they knew about Westfield High was about to change forever. Principal Victoria Sterling appeared at the end of the hallway, her perfectly styled hair and power suit radiating authority as she pushed through the crowd with the determined stride of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. But as she got closer and saw Harper's red-marked cheek, Braden's guilty expression, and the dozens of phones still recording, her confident facade began to crack. "What is going on here?" Sterling demanded. Though Harper suspected she already knew, the principal's phone had been buzzing constantly for the past 5 minutes, and her carefully cultivated composure was showing stress fractures. "Mr. Ashworth just assaulted me," Harper said clearly, speaking directly into her phone's camera to ensure her words were captured for the live stream. "In front of 37 witnesses, after threatening me and my family because of my journalistic investigation into systematic abuse at this school." Sterling's eyes darted between Harper's marked cheek and Braden's panicked expression. Harper could see the calculations happening behind the principal's eyes as she tried to figure out how to minimize this disaster. But the mathematics of damage control had changed. This wasn't a quiet incident that could be buried with donations and threats. This was public, recorded, and spreading exponentially across social media platforms. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding," Sterling began, but her words were drowned out by the sudden arrival of Harper's mother, Linda Mackenzie, who had received an emergency alert from the live stream and driven straight from the hospital still wearing her nursing scrubs. "Harper?" Linda pushed through the crowd and immediately cupped her daughter's face, examining the bright red handprint with professional medical assessment. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine, Mom," Harper assured her, though she kept her phone positioned to capture everything. "But I think Mr. Ashworth might need legal attention." The words sent a visible shudder through the assembled crowd. Students began whispering frantically to each other as the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't just teenage drama anymore. This was assault, caught on camera, with legal implications that even the Ashworth family's money might not be able to resolve. That's when Kenzie Walsh pushed through the crowd, her purple-streaked hair flying as she carried a laptop opened to the Westfield Herald's website. "Harper, you need to see this," she called out breathlessly. "The video has been shared over 2,000 times in the last 10 minutes. Local news stations are picking it up. And the state education department just issued a statement saying they are launching an immediate investigation." Harper felt a thrill of satisfaction mixed with fear. She had known this moment would change everything, but the speed of the transformation was overwhelming even for someone who had planned for it. Around them, students were holding up their phones to show each other the spreading video. Harper could see her own face on dozens of screens. The moment of impact replayed over and over as the story took on a life of its own. "Turn off the cameras," Sterling ordered desperately. "Everyone put your phones away right now. This is a private school matter that will be handled through appropriate channels." "Actually," a new voice interrupted from the edge of the crowd, "this is now a matter of public interest." Everyone turned to see a woman in a sharp business suit holding a press badge and a recording device. "Sarah Martinez, Channel 7 News. We received reports of an assault involving a student journalist who was investigating alleged corruption at this institution." Harper's heart pounded as she realized her story had transcended the walls of Westfield High. Real journalists were now taking notice, which meant real accountability might finally be possible. But she also knew this was the moment when things would become truly dangerous, because cornered powerful people were capable of desperate actions. "You can't be here," Sterling said, moving to block the reporter's view. "This is private property, and these are minors." "The assault was live-streamed publicly," Martinez replied smoothly. "And we have parental consent for our interview." She gestured toward Linda Mackenzie, who nodded firmly. Harper's mother had signed the consent form the reporter offered without hesitation. Braden seemed to realize that his world was collapsing around him. "This is insane," he said loudly, appealing to the crowd. "She's been stalking us for months, invading our privacy, making up stories. She probably staged this whole thing for attention." But his words fell flat. Too many students had witnessed his behavior over the years, and now that someone had finally stood up to him publicly, they were finding their own voices. Madison Brooks, the sophomore who had been terrorized into helping Braden cheat, stepped forward with her phone held high. "I recorded him threatening me last month," she announced, her voice shaking but determined. "He said if I didn't help him cheat on chemistry tests, he would make sure I never got into college." Other students began murmuring agreement. Harper watched in amazement as her individual stand against Braden transformed into a collective uprising against the culture of fear he had created. Tyler Jensen from the wrestling team spoke up about being pressured to throw matches. Chloe Anderson from Drama Club revealed that Braden had sexually harassed her during rehearsals. Even some of Braden's own teammates began distancing themselves as they realized the protection his family name offered was evaporating in real time. "Stop!" Braden shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You're all lying. You're just trying to destroy me because you're jealous. The only thing being destroyed here is the lie that money can buy immunity from consequences," Harper said, still speaking into her phone's camera. "For too long, this school has protected predators and silenced victims, but that ends today." The crowd erupted in cheers. Students who had lived in fear of Braden's retaliation were suddenly finding courage in numbers. And Harper could see the power dynamic that had ruled Westfield High for years crumbling before her eyes. But she also knew the real battle was just beginning, because Braden's father was surely already mobilizing lawyers, and the Ashworth family would not surrender their influence without a fight. As if summoned by her thoughts, Robert Ashworth appeared at the end of the hallway, a tall, imposing man in an expensive suit who radiated the kind of authority that came from decades of getting his way through intimidation and wealth. His face was thunderous as he surveyed the scene, his son surrounded by accusers, cameras rolling, his family's reputation being destroyed in real time. "What is the meaning of this circus?" Robert demanded, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "I want everyone with a camera out of this building immediately." "Actually, Mr. Ashworth," reporter Martinez stepped forward with her credentials visible. "Your son just committed assault on camera. We're here to document the response of the institution that has allegedly been covering up his behavior for years." Robert's face darkened further. "My son did no such thing. Any allegation to the contrary is libel, and I'll sue every person spreading these lies for everything they're worth." "Then you'll be suing your son, too," Harper said, holding up her phone to show the crystal-clear footage of Braden's assault, "because he's the one who provided the evidence." And for the first time, Harper saw genuine fear in Robert Ashworth's eyes. He was a man accustomed to controlling narratives through backroom deals and financial pressure. But this was playing out in public with video evidence that couldn't be denied or buried. She watched him realize that his usual tactics wouldn't work, that his son's actions had created a situation even the Ashworth fortune couldn't resolve. "Braden, we're leaving," Robert ordered. "Don't say another word." But Braden wasn't listening. The stress of his collapsing world had triggered something desperate and reckless in him. "You want the truth," he shouted at Harper. "The truth is that I run this school. My family owns half this town. We decide who succeeds and who fails. And little scholarship trash like you should be grateful we let you exist here at all." The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Even Robert Ashworth looked horrified at his son's public confession of the elitism that had driven years of abuse. Harper felt a moment of almost pity for Braden. He was so accustomed to his privilege being protected that he didn't understand he was destroying himself with every word. "Thank you for that clarity," Harper said into her camera. "I think everyone here now understands exactly what we've been dealing with." The reporter was frantically taking notes. The live stream viewer count had climbed past 10,000, and Harper could see more news vans pulling into the school parking lot through the windows. What had started as one girl's investigation into local corruption was becoming a national story about privilege, power, and the courage required to speak truth to authority. Principal Sterling seemed to realize that her own career was now in jeopardy. "Everyone return to your classes immediately," she ordered. "This disruption ends now." "Actually," Linda Mackenzie stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years advocating for patients against institutional indifference. "My daughter is filing a police report for assault, and based on what I've heard here today, I suspect there will be multiple criminal investigations launched before this is over." That's when everything changed. Harper watched Sterling's composure finally crack completely, as the principal realized that this wasn't a crisis she could manage with public relations and damage control. Criminal investigations meant external oversight. Federal attention meant transparency requirements. And transparency meant the end of the corrupt system that had protected the Ashworth family for years. "Harper Mackenzie!" came a voice from behind the crowd, and everyone turned to see Officer Jake Sullivan, the school's resource officer, approaching with backup. "I need to speak with you about filing an assault report." Harper nodded, but before she followed the officer, she turned back to face Braden one last time. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the removal of the protection he had always taken for granted. "I gave you every chance to choose differently," she told him. "But you chose to use your power to hurt people instead of help them, and that choice has consequences." 6 months later, Harper Mackenzie stood at the podium in Westfield High's renovated auditorium, looking out at an audience that included her mother, Kenzie Walsh, former Principal Sterling's replacement, Dr. Jennifer Hayes, and dozens of students who had found their voices in the aftermath of what local media had dubbed the slap heard round the county. Braden Ashworth had been expelled, lost his college scholarships, and was currently serving community service as part of his plea agreement on assault charges. His father's construction company was under federal investigation for bid rigging, and the family's influence in local politics had evaporated overnight. Principal Sterling had resigned in disgrace, and the school board had implemented new policies requiring transparency in disciplinary actions, and independent oversight of administrative decisions. But the most important change was harder to quantify. It was visible in the way students walked the hallways without fear, in the increasing number of reports filed when harassment occurred, in the knowledge that someone would listen and act when victims found the courage to speak up. 6 months ago, Harper began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. I thought journalism was about telling stories, but I learned that sometimes journalism is about changing them. Each of you has the power to decide what story your life tells, what story your school tells, what story your community tells. She paused, looking directly at the camera that was live streaming her speech to the thousands of people who had followed her story. The most dangerous lie we can tell ourselves is that we're powerless to change systems that seem too big, too connected, too protected to challenge. But the truth is that every system of oppression depends on the silence of good people. And when we refuse to be silent, when we document the truth and share it fearlessly, we discover that even the most powerful people are not actually untouchable. Harper had received scholarship offers from journalism programs across the country. Her investigation had been published in national magazines and had inspired similar efforts at schools in dozens of states. But, perhaps most importantly, she had learned that the girl who had once tried to remain invisible had actually been preparing herself to be impossible to ignore. To anyone watching this who feels powerless, who thinks their voice doesn't matter, who believes that telling the truth isn't worth the risk, Harper concluded, remember that every movement for justice started with one person deciding they had seen enough injustice. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And your courage to speak up might be exactly what someone else needs to find their own strength. As the applause filled the auditorium, Harper thought about that morning in October when everything had changed with a single slap, about how a moment of violence intended to silence her had instead amplified her voice beyond anything she could have imagined. She had set out to expose one bully and had ended up challenging an entire system, had started by trying to protect herself and had ended up protecting everyone. The girl who had once perfected the art of being invisible had become impossible to ignore, and Harper Mackenzie had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to disappear when someone wants you gone. Because truth has a way of demanding to be heard, and courage, once awakened, tends to spread like wildfire through communities that have been waiting for someone brave enough to light the first match. 3 years later, the Harper Mackenzie Foundation for Student Advocacy had helped expose corruption at 17 schools across 6 states. Her investigation techniques had become standard curriculum in high school journalism programs, and the Westfield Protocol for handling institutional abuse had been adopted by educational institutions nationwide. But perhaps, most importantly, Harper's story had inspired thousands of young people to pick up cameras, start recording, and refuse to accept that injustice was simply the price of powerlessness. Every week, Harper received messages from students who had found their own voices after watching her stand up to Braden Ashworth, kids who had documented harassment, exposed cover-ups, and discovered that adults who seemed untouchable were actually just people who had never been properly challenged. Each story reminded her that the slap she received that October morning had created ripples that were still spreading, still inspiring, still changing lives in ways she could never have imagined. The most powerful weapon against corruption isn't money or connections. Harper often told the journalism students she mentored, it's a 17-year-old with a camera and the courage to use it. Because when young people stop accepting that injustice is normal, the world has no choice but to change. And in communities across America, that change continued. One voice, one camera, one moment of courage at a time. Kenzie Walsh, now pursuing her doctorate in social psychology, often spoke at conferences about the psychological impact of bystander intervention. How witnessing one person's courage could transform entire community dynamics. Skylar Pierce had become a domestic violence counselor, using her own experience with Braden's control to help other young women recognize and escape toxic relationships before they escalated to physical violence. Even Ethan Cross, who had eventually testified against his former best friend, now worked with at-risk youth, teaching them that loyalty to friends never meant complicity in their cruelty. He carried a photo of Harper's bruised cheek in his wallet, not as a reminder of shame, but as evidence that speaking up was always worth the temporary discomfort of disappointing the wrong people. The original video of Braden's assault had been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms. But Harper's follow-up documentary, Breaking the Silence: How One School Changed Everything, had become required viewing in education policy courses nationwide. It showed that individual courage could create institutional transformation, that student voices could challenge adult authority, and that democracy worked best when its youngest citizens refused to accept that injustice was inevitable. As Harper prepared to graduate from Columbia Journalism School with offers from major news organizations across the country, she kept one thing on her desk that reminded her why she had chosen this path: a worn newspaper clipping from the Westfield Herald, dated October 16th, with a simple headline that had started everything: Campus Safety Concerns, a Pattern of Behavior. Sometimes the smallest stones create the biggest avalanches, and sometimes the quietest voices end up changing the world.